Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to join in the study of Torah and to join in an exchange with one another about the wisdom that we see in the text and the wisdom that we see within ourselves and discover in our collaboration with one another. We are in Parshat Vaera, in the book of Exodus, chapter 6, starting with verse 1. We will read through the English translation of our portion. I'll share with you a focused study about it, and then we'll open it up for our wide-ranging and collective conversation about our Torah portion. If you'd like to go ahead and unmute at this time, feel free to do so, and together we have the opportunity to recite the blessing, giving thanks for this moment. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher keshanu b'mitzotav v'tzivanu la'asot divrei Torah. Thank you, God, for this opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. Book of Exodus, chapter 6, verse 1. I'll share with you the opening few verses, starting with verse 2, rather. I'll share with you the opening verses, and then I'll invite others to have an opportunity to read the English translation as well. God spoke to Moses and said to him, I am Adonai. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, but I did not make myself known to them by my name, Yud He Vav He. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they lived as sojourners. I have now heard the moaning of the Israelites, because the Egyptians are holding them in bondage, and I have remembered my covenant. Say therefore to the Israelite people, I am the Adonai. I will free you from the labors of the Egyptians and deliver you from their bondage. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and through extraordinary chastisements, and I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God. And you shall know that I, Adonai, am your God, who freed you from the labors of the Egyptians. I will bring you into the land which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you for a possession, I, Adonai. But when Moses told this to the Israelites, they would not listen to Moses. Their spirits were crushed by cruel bondage. Richard, would you like to continue there at verse 10?
Thank you, Rabbi. Well, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Go and tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the Israelites depart from his land. But Moses appealed to the Lord, saying, If the Israelites would not listen to me, how then should Pharaoh heed me, a man of impeded speech? So the Lord spoke to both Moses and Aaron in regard to the Israelites and Pharaoh, king of Egypt, instructing them to deliver the Israelites from the land of Egypt. The following are the heads of their respective clans. The sons of Reuben, Israel's firstborn, Enoch and Palu, Hezron and Carmi. Those are the families of Reuben. The sons of Simeon, Jemuel, Jamin, Ohad, Yachin, Zohar, and Saul, the son of a Canaanite woman. Those are the families of Simeon. These are the names of Levi's sons by their lineage: Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. And the span of Levi's life was 137 years. The sons of Gershon, Libni, and Shimei by their families. The sons of Kohath, Amram, Izhar, Hebron, and Uziel. And the span of Kohath's life was 133 years. The sons of Merari, Mali, and Mushi. These are the families of the Levites by their lineage.
Thank you. Sherry, would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 20?
Thank you. Amram took to wife his father's sister Jochebed, and she bore him Aaron and Moses. And the span of Amram's life was 137 years. The son of Izhar, Korah, Zepeg, I'm having trouble pronouncing these names correctly, and Zikri,
yeah.
Zikri, the sons of Uzel, Mishel, and
Safan.
Elsaphan, and Sithra.
Mhm.
Aaron took to his wife Elisheba, daughter of
Aminadab.
and sister Nashon, and she bore him Nadab and Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar, the sons of Korath, Isar, I'm just
Elkanah,
Elkanah, and
Abias.
Abias. Those are the families of the Korahites. And Aaron's son Eleazar took to wife one of the Putiel's son, and she bore him Phinehas. Those are the heads of the fathers' houses of the Levites by their families.
Thank you. Steve, you want to read a little bit there, starting at verse 26?
Okay. It is the same Aaron and Moses to whom the Lord said, bring forth the Israelites from the land of Egypt, troop by troop. It was they who spoke to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to free the Israelites from the Egyptians. These are the same Moses and Aaron, for when the Lord spoke to Moses in the land of Egypt, and the Lord said to Moses, I am the Lord. Speak to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, all that I will tell you. Moses appealed to the Lord, saying, see, I am of impeded speech. How then should Pharaoh heed me?
Thank you, Steve. June, would you like to continue that at the very start of chapter 7?
Thank you, Rabbi. The Lord replied to Moses, see, I place you in the role of God to Pharaoh, with your brother Aaron as your prophet. You shall repeat all that I command you, and your brother Aaron shall speak to Pharaoh to let the Israelites depart from his land. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, that I may multiply my signs and marvels in the land of Egypt. When Pharaoh does not heed you, I will lay my hand upon Egypt and deliver my ranks, my people the Israelites, from the land of Egypt with extraordinary chastisements. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I stretch out my hand over Egypt and bring out the Israelites from their midst. This Moses and Aaron did. As the Lord commanded them, so they did. Moses was 80 years old, and Aaron 83, when they made their demand on Pharaoh.
Thank you, June. And Steve, would you like to continue there at verse 8?
Thank you, Rabbi. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when Pharaoh speaks to you and says, produce your marvel, you shall say to Aaron, take your rod and cast it down before Pharaoh. It shall turn into a serpent. So Moses and Aaron came before Pharaoh and did just as the Lord had commanded. Aaron cast down his rod in the presence of Pharaoh and his courtiers, and it turned into a serpent. Then Pharaoh, for his part, summoned the wise men and the sorcerers, and the Egyptian magicians in turn did the same with their spells. Each cast down his rod, and they turned into serpents. But Aaron's rod swallowed their rods, yet Pharaoh's heart stiffened, and he did not heed them, as the Lord had said.
Thanks, Steve. Wendy, would you like to read a little bit, starting at
Sure.
verse 15?
Sure, thank you. And the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh is stubborn. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning as he is coming out to the water, and station yourself before him at the edge of the Nile, taking with you the rod that turned into a snake. And say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, sent me to you to say, let my people go, that you may worship me in the wilderness. But you have paid no heed until now. Thus says the Lord, by this you shall know that I am the Lord. See, I shall strike the water in the Nile with the rod that is in my hand, and it will be turned into blood. And the fish in the Nile will die. The Nile will stink so that the Egyptians will find it impossible to drink the water of the Nile.
Thank you. Jim, would you like to continue there at verse 19?
Thank you, Rabbi. And Adonai said to Moses, say to Aaron, take your rod and hold out your arm over the waters of Egypt, its rivers, its canals, its ponds, all its bodies of water, that they may turn to blood. There shall be blood throughout the land of Egypt, even in vessels of wood and stone. Moses and Aaron did just as Adonai commanded. He lifted up the rod and struck the water in the Nile in the sight of Pharaoh and his courtiers, and all the water in the Nile was turned into blood, and the fish in the Nile died. The Nile stank so that Egyptians could not drink water from the Nile, and there was blood throughout the land of Egypt. But when the Egyptian magicians did the same with their spells, Pharaoh's heart stiffened and he did not heed them, as Adonai had spoken. Pharaoh turned and went into his palace, paying no regard even to this. And all the Egyptians had to dig around about the Nile for drinking water because they could not drink the water of the Nile. When 7 days had passed after Adonai struck the Nile, Adonai said to Moses, go to Pharaoh and say to him, thus says Adonai, let my people go that they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go, then I will plague your whole country with frogs. The Nile shall swarm with frogs, and they shall come up and enter your palace, your bedchamber and your bed, the houses of your courtiers and your people, and your ovens and your kneading bowls. The frogs shall come up on you and on your people and on all your courtiers.
Thank you, Jim. Robert, would you like to continue there at the very start of chapter 8?
Yes, let me just get it. Hold on. I'm on my phone. I read it on my phone and my computer, so I apologize. Here we go. And the Lord spake unto Moses, go unto Pharaoh and say unto him, thus saith the Lord, let my people
This is
go.
at the very start of chapter 8?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And the Lord spake unto Moses, go unto Pharaoh and say unto him, thus saith the Lord, let my people go, that they may serve me. And if thou refuse to let them go, behold, I
I'm
will.
sorry. It's
Is it-
chapter 8, verse 1.
Yeah, see, it says Exodus 8.
Okay.
No, but let someone else read then. That's fine, because my
Okay. What I have at the very start of chapter 8 is, and God said to Moses, say to Aaron, hold out your arm with the rod over the rivers, the canals, and the ponds, and bring up the frogs on the land of Egypt. Aaron held out his arm over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. But the magicians did the same with their spells and brought frogs upon the land of Egypt. And now we're on chapter 8, verse 4.
yeah, mine's different. Yes.
Okay, then, David and Susan, would you like to join us there?
Sure.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you very much. And Pharaoh called to Moses and to Aaron and said, entreat the Lord that he take away the frogs from me and from my people, and I shall send off the people that they may sacrifice to the Lord. And Moses said to Pharaoh, you may vaunt over me as for when I should retreat for you and should entreat for you and for your servants and for your people to cut off the frogs from you and from your houses. Only in the Nile will they remain. And he said, for tomorrow. And he said, as you have spoken, so that you may know that there is none like the Lord our God. And the frogs will turn away from you and from your houses and from your servants and from your people. Only in the Nile will they remain.
Then Moses and Aaron left Pharaoh's presence, and Moses cried out to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh in the manner of the frogs, which had been inflicted upon Pharaoh. And Yudhe did as Moses asked. The frogs died out in the houses and in the courtyards and in the fields, and they piled them up in heaps until the land stank. But when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he became stubborn and would not heed them, as Yudhe had spoken.
Thank you both so much. Marty, would you like to continue that verse 12?
Thank you, Rabbi. Then the Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, hold out your rod and strike the dust of the earth, and it shall turn to lice throughout the land of Egypt. And they did so. Aaron held out his arm with the rod and struck the dust of the earth, and vermin came upon man and beast. All the dust of the earth turned to lice throughout the land of Egypt. The magicians did the like with their spells to produce lice, but they could not. The vermin remained upon man and beast. And the magician said to Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. But Pharaoh's heart stiffened, and he would not heed them, as the Lord had spoken.
Thank you, Marty. And Justin, would you like to continue there at verse 16?
Thank you, Rabbi. And the Lord said to Moses, arise early in the morning and stand before Pharaoh. Behold, he is going out to the water, and you shall say to him, so said the Lord, let my people go out and serve me. For if you do not let my people go, behold, I will incite against you and against your servants and against your people and in your houses a mixture of noxious creatures, and the houses of Egypt will be filled with a mixture of noxious creatures, as well as the land upon which they are. And I will separate on that day the land of Goshen, upon which my people stand, that there will be no mixture of noxious creatures there, in order that you know that I am the Lord in the midst of the earth. I will make a redemption between my people and your people. This sign will come about tomorrow. The Lord did so, and a heavy mixture of noxious creatures came to the Pharaoh's house and his servants' house, and throughout the entire land of Egypt. The land was destroyed because of the mixture of noxious creatures. Thereupon Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron, and he said, go, sacrifice to your God in the land. But Moses said, it is improper to do that, for we will sacrifice the abomination of the Egyptians to God our Lord. Will we sacrifice the deity of the Egyptians before their eyes, and they not stone us? Let us go for a 3-day journey in the desert and sacrifice to the Lord our God, as he will say to us. Pharaoh said, I will let you go out, and you will sacrifice to the Lord your God in the desert, but do not go far away. Entreat him on my behalf. Moses said, behold, I am going away from you, and I will entreat the Lord, and the mixture of noxious creatures will depart from Pharaoh, from his servants, and from his people tomorrow. Only let Pharaoh not tease anymore by not letting the people go to sacrifice to the Lord. So Moses went away from Pharaoh and entreated the Lord. And the Lord did according to Moses' word, and he removed the mixture of noxious creatures from Pharaoh and his servants and from his people. Not one was left. But Pharaoh hardened his heart this time also, and he did not let the people go.
Thank you, Justin. And Catherine, would you like to read a little bit at the very start of chapter 9?
Thank you, Rabbi.
The Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh and say to him, 'Thus says the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, let my people go to worship me. For if you refuse to let them go and continue to hold them, then the hand of Adonai will strike your livestock in the fields, the horses, the asses, the camels, the cattle, and the sheep, with a very severe pestilence. But Adonai will make a distinction between the livestock of Israel and the livestock of the Egyptians, so that nothing shall die of all that belongs to the Israelites. Adonai has time tomorrow. Adonai will do this thing in the land." And Adonai did so the next day. All the livestock of the Egyptians died, but of the livestock of the Israelites, not a beast died. When Pharaoh inquired, he found that not a head of the livestock of Israel had died. Yet Pharaoh remained stubborn, and he would not let the people go.
Thank you, Catherine. And Norman, would you like to read a little bit, starting at verse 8 of chapter 9?
Then Adonai said to Moses and Aaron, "Each of you take handfuls of soot from the kiln, and let Moses throw it toward the sky in the sight of Pharaoh. It shall become a fine dust over all the land of Egypt and cause an inflammation breaking out in boils on human and beast throughout the land of Egypt." So they took soot of the kiln and appeared before Pharaoh. Moses threw it toward the sky, and it caused an inflammation breaking out in boils on human and beast. The magician priests were unable to confront Moses because of the inflammation, for the inflammation afflicted the magician priests as well as the other Egyptians. But Adonai stiffened the heart of Pharaoh, and he would not heed them, just as Adonai had told Moses.
Thank you so much. Jay, would you like to read a little bit, starting at verse 13? You need to unmute, Jay. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Hashem said to Moses, "Early in the morning, present yourself to Pharaoh and say to him, 'Thus says Adonai, the God of the Hebrews, let my people go to worship me, for this time I will send all my plagues upon your person and your courtiers and your people, in order that you may know that there is none like me in all the world. I could have stretched forth my hand and stricken you and your people with pestilence, and you would have been effaced from the earth. Nevertheless, I've spared you for this purpose, in order to show you my power, and in order that my fame may be sound throughout the world. Yet you continue to thwart my people and do not let them go. This time tomorrow, I will rain down a very heavy hail, such as has not been seen in Egypt from the day it was founded until now. Therefore, order your livestock and everything you have in the open, brought under shelter. Every man and beast that is found outside, not having been brought indoors, shall perish when the hail comes down upon them. Those among Pharaoh's courtiers who feared Adonai's word brought their slaves and livestock indoors to safety. But those who paid no regard to the word of Hashem left their slaves and livestock in the open."
Thank you, Jay. And Rose, would you like to continue there at verse 22?
Verse 22?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Hashem said to Moses, "Hold out your arm." Is that where
Yes.
we are? "Hold out your arm toward the sky, that hail may fall on all the land of Egypt, upon human and beast, and all the grasses of the field in the land of Egypt." So Moses held out his rod toward the sky, and Hashem sent thunder and hail and fire streamed down to the ground, as Hashem rained down hail upon the land of Egypt. The hail was very heavy, fire flashing in the midst of the hail, such as had not fallen on the land of Egypt since it had become a nation. Throughout the land of Egypt, the hail struck down all that were in the open, both human and beast. The hail also struck down all the grasses of the field and shattered all the trees of the field. Only in the region of Goshen where the Israelites were, there was no hail.
Thank you, Rose. Robert, we're now at chapter 9, verse 27. Would you like to read a little bit there?
Yes, thank you. Mine was just a little off for a ways.
Okay.
And Pharaoh sent and called for Moses and Aaron and said unto them, I have sinned this time. The Lord is righteous, and I and my people are wicked. Entreat the Lord, for it is enough, that there be no more mighty thunderings and hail, and I will let you go, and ye shall stay no longer. And Moses said unto him, As soon as I am gone out of the city, I will spread abroad my hands unto the Lord, and the thunder shall cease. Neither shall there be any more hail, that thou mayest know how that the earth is the Lord's. But as for thee and thy servant, I know that ye will not yet fear the Lord God. And the flax and the barley was smitten, for the barley was in the ear, and the flax was boiled. But the wheat and the rice were not smitten, for they were not grown up. And Moses went out of the city from Pharaoh, and spread abroad his hands unto the Lord, and the thunders and hail ceased, and the rain was not poured upon the earth. And when Pharaoh saw that the rain and the hail and the thunders were ceased, he sinned yet more and hardened his heart, he and his servants. And the heart of Pharaoh was hardened, neither would he let the children of Israel go, as the Lord had spoken by Moses.
Thank you, and thank you, everyone. That's our entire Torah portion for the week. If you have a copy of the study sheet, I invite you to take it out at this time. I'd like to share with you what kind of caught my attention studying the Torah portion this week. And while this portion, of course, is full of all this drama about these plagues that are being afflicted upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt, what caught my attention was way back at the beginning, and in fact, the verses that give the name to this week's Torah portion Vaera. So I'm looking at chapter 6, verse 3. I appeared, Vaera, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, but I did not make myself known to them by my name, Yud, He, Vav, He. So it caught my attention because this notion about appearance, the word Vaera comes from the Hebrew word Ra'ah, means to see. So here God is proclaiming that I appeared, I manifested myself as El Shaddai. And the word El is often another word for God, and Shaddai seems to come from the Hebrew word Shaddai, which means breast, and somehow we emerge from this etymology with El Shaddai often being roughly translated as God Almighty, but it's one of the many names for God, and as such, it evolves from not just one, but two nouns. Okay. And yet God says, I made myself known as El Shaddai, but I didn't make myself known to them by my name, Yud He Vav He. And those four letters there are components of the Hebrew verb to be. So I was kind of caught there by this notion that to earlier ancestors, God made God's self known in a noun form. But here God is making a distinction, says it's important for the Israelites to experience me and know me not as a noun, but as a verb. And when I was playing with that notion, I remembered that just several verses ago, we have this moment at the burning bush where Moses experiences God, and Moses says, well, what should I call you when I say this God has called me to help free you from Pharaoh? What should I call you? And at that point, God says, to the Israelites, you shall announce me as Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, which can be translated as I am becoming that which I am becoming. So it seems to be important for the Israelites to encounter God as a verb. And for me, this was a dramatic shift in the way God is now appearing and wanting to be known. Earlier in Genesis, the book of Genesis, it was various forms of this in this noun form, but here it's critical for the Israelites to experience him as something more dynamic, something that's constantly evolving, something that is in process, something that has no fixed definition as a noun does. So I was thinking about this, and somehow it got me to thinking about a movie that was made a few years ago called Patterson. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but Patterson is a movie that takes place in Patterson, New Jersey, and the main character in it is a man named Patterson. And Patterson is a bus driver by day and a poet by night. So he engages during the day in this very strict, mundane routine of driving a bus on a very fixed route. He observes the city around him. He observes the people around him. And he leads a life that also seems to be very routinized. After work, he walks his dog. He then goes and has a beer at a particular bar. Then he goes home to be with his wife, and then he writes poetry. So he is engaged in something that is, on the one hand, a life that's full of very defined routine, and yet he's also engaged in something that's quite creative. For the movie, the maker of the film turned to a friend of his who is a poet, a man named Ron Padgett. And Ron Padgett happens to live in Patterson, New Jersey, and asked him to write some poems that would be poems that the character in the movie would have written. And so here's one of the poems from that movie. When you're a child, you learn there are 3 dimensions: height, width, and depth, like a shoebox. Then later you hear there's a 4th dimension, time. Then some say there can be 5, 6, 7. I looked at that poem, and in the middle of this movie, this character who on the one hand is leading a very routinized, cyclical life, but also is leading a life outside of that is full of creativity and engendering new possibilities. This poem here seems to be hinting at that we begin our lives only aware of its limitations, if you will, that which is tangible and fixed, height, weight, and depth. And then at some point we experience another dimension, that of time. And when we experience and become aware that there's something called time, that opens up a portal to expanding possibilities. 5th, 6th, 7th, and perhaps even more dimensions. So that brought me back to the opening of this week's Torah portion, where it's critical for the Israelites to experience this source of liberation, not as a God of a place or an object, but as a source of dynamic energy that is constantly in evolution and change and becoming. And because once the Israelites begin to assimilate, that's what they are following, that's what's freeing them, then possibilities of all kinds begin to open up. So I invite you to turn over the study sheet. In antagonism to this power of liberation, to this source of dynamic possibilities, to this divinity expressed through a verb rather than through a noun, we have the character Pharaoh. And Pharaoh is obviously quite disturbed by what seems to be the subversion of the fixed world that Pharaoh is ruling over. And in our portion here in the book of Exodus, he cries out, "They are shirkers," using the word nirpim. And our commentator Rashi points out, nirpim means the work is rafui, loose, lax in their hands. The work falls away from them. And he gets that because we have the Hebrew word rafa, which means to relax, to withdraw, to let go, to be idle. So Rashi seems to be saying what is terrifying and distressing and subverting for Pharaoh is that these are people who are somehow willing to have a life other than work, who are somehow engaged in some form of letting things go, of relaxing, of being somehow idle. And so in number 4, Pharaoh cries out after having called them shirkers, "Let them labor," ya'asu, from the verb to make or to do. Let them labor and let them not pay attention to false words. And here, not pay attention to false words, to gaze upon sha'ah. So here, our midrash is going to be exploring what is this thing about gazing? What is that all about? And so our midrash says, what is yishu? And that tells this lovely, lovely story. Well, they had scrolls in their possession with which they would play, to sport, or to take delight in from Shabbat to Shabbat. These declared that God would redeem them. So Pharaoh said to them, Al Yishu, don't let them play. So the Midrash takes up this word that Pharaoh expresses. Don't let them do this Yishu thing. And the Midrash says, yeah, this Yishu thing is about being playful, about being engaged in dreaming. And this playfulness takes the form in this midrash of having scrolls that they would play with from Shabbat to Shabbat. And in the scrolls was this proclamation, this promise of redemption from the constraint of their slavery. And this comes up again in Psalm 119, the same word here. If your Torah had not been my plaything, I would have perished in my affliction. The psalmist is singing a song, giving thanks to a sense of Torah being a play object, of giving them some relief, giving the Israelites relief from just the constant routine of going to bed, getting up, working, going back to bed, getting up and working. Here is our poet, Patterson in Patterson, New Jersey, who is doing both. He is engaged in this labor of driving a bus on a fixed route, but he's also engaged in this act of liberation that we call poetry, this kind of playfulness. So I just want to follow a little bit more about this notion of reverie, this playfulness, and then we'll look at our painting. And this is number 5, is an excerpt from a lovely book by John Armstrong, who was a British critic. He wrote a book called Move Closer, An Intimate Philosophy of Art. Basically, his book is about the significance of what happens when we no longer just look at a work of art in a detached, analytical way, but somehow we develop a relationship with it. And that relationship with the work of art causes us to introduce something of ourselves into the relationship. Here's what he says about reverie. Reverie is the state of giving ourselves up to the flow of associations. This state of letting something happen, a species of relaxation, is one we need to cultivate when we look at paintings or buildings. Reverie is a mode of introducing personal material into a picture or building. It brings an abundance of thoughts and feelings into play. It also frees us from merely following routine assumptions. Reverie operates at the root of thinking. It is essential to the creative process in which we come to make thoughts for ourselves. The value of a personal discovery lies in the fact that not only do we arrive at a helpful conclusion, but that we have experience of how the conclusion was reached. We gain acquaintance with the process of coming to see. Vaera. This is about seeing and is about a new way of seeing. And if the Israelites are going to be a free people who are going to construct a free nation in a free homeland, then they have to see differently than the way they have been seeing in Egypt, where everything seems defined and settled and destined to be the same forever. And that is the role that reverie and play begin to assert themselves as a significant part of the development and evolution of the Israelite people. It has to be a seeing that goes beyond perception of that which is defined and well clarified. So now I like to take a look at our painting here. And this is by Willem de Kooning. And Willem de Kooning was really one of the founders of the abstract expressionist art movement. And in particular, he was in a subset of that became known as action painting. And he and Jackson Pollock were really the two prime promoters and exemplars of action painting. And the notion of action painting, as it was defined by the art critics, was that they were producing not a finished product on a canvas. The canvas was itself the scene of an event that was happening. The act of painting is what the artwork was, not the artwork was not the final product of what was on the canvas. So there's again this notion about the beauty is not the substance that is tangible. The artwork is the activity of the artist, the verb nature of the artist, the doing of the artist is what the real artwork was. And so that brings me back again to this notion that Torah seems to be saying what's critical for the Israelites at this point in their evolution is to go beyond objects and to enter into the realm of activity, of dynamism, of constant evolution and self-creation. And so Willem de Kooning was not only one of the prime movers and founders of the abstract expressionist movement, he was kind of an odd figure within the movement because he never really gave up the value of the human figure in artwork. Abstract expressionism, as it developed as an ideology within the art world, kind of abhorred the notion of having a recognizable figure on a canvas. Everything should be abstract. That would be the highest form of art. But Willem de Kooning kind of continued to value throughout his artwork the notion of the human figure. And here towards the end of his life, this is done in 1984, just a few years before he died, he evolved into a different stage of his painting. And he found great joy in the work of Matisse from decades before. And many of you may have seen a great painting that Matisse did of a circle of women who were dancing. And if you look at that and then you look at this, you can begin to see that these swirls of forms that are here on this canvas you can begin to see Matisse's dancers in their circle with their arms around one another. For me, what is captured as a result is that there's human presence here. There's a presence here without there being a clarified definition of that presence. And I want to suggest that this notion that de Kooning is sharing with us on his canvas is reflective of what's being shared by Ron Padgett in his poetry, perhaps even in the movie itself, Patterson, and in our Torah portion, that when we engage in reverie, when we engage in a playfulness, we unleash dimensions perhaps we never even knew existed that ultimately lead not only to our own self-development, but to our liberation and the liberation of the worlds around us. So with that, I'd love to hear what you experienced and what you saw in the course of our time together and the course of your studying our Torah portion. Please, Rose, and then David and Susan.
Well, thank you, Rabbi. You know, first of all, I just want to bring up the fact that Bnei Israel are not mentioned at all in any of this. This is all, you know, like a fight between Pharaoh and Hashem. And, you know, none of these plagues affect Goshen, you know, so my question is, did they even know about this? You know, did they know about this? And my other thing that I wanted to say was that this idea of the Jews being lazy is carried further during the Roman Empire, because the Romans interpreted Jews honoring Shabbat and participating in Shabbat as laziness. And a number of the Roman writers said these Jews are lazy because, you know, they honor Shabbat. And I think that by honoring Shabbat and being, quote, lazy, they were actually, you know, showing their freedom, as you pointed out. And then it is through Shabbat and the idea that there is history and things like that is in contrast with what happens in Egypt, where you have a static society. So there's a number of things happening, but I did want to bring up about Bnei Israel are not mentioned at all in this. It's kind of like, you know, like King Kong versus Godzilla or something.
Well, I think Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, the people of Israel are mentioned. And in fact, I would like to suggest that they, in effect, inaugurate this, they begin to inaugurate this disruption of Egyptian hegemony, of pharaonic hegemony, the notion that everything must constitute oppression and hierarchy and regimen and enslavement, because they begin to groan, because they are having children. And so that is when God comes into this picture saying, I've heard the moaning and groaning. That somehow brings God into the picture. So they actually, in some ways, initiate what we call the Exodus. But you're right. There is the two protagonists in this, Moses, or God through Moses, and Pharaoh. But you know, there is something happening underneath those two figures who represent opposing points of view, opposing philosophies. So let me call upon David and Susan.
Well, I had a different take than Rose on the topic, and that was that it says several times that God protected the Israelites in the land of Goshen. And I thought, after I listened to your Drash on the Torah portion, I thought, oh, so God protected them and allowed them their reverie so they could continue playing and being relaxed and not be all upset about what was going on. And they would be ready to serve him.
So So they were kind of they were separated, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. And David, did you want to?
Yeah, I had a, and now for something completely different.
Good.
This Torah portion, in one sense, or from one direction, seems like a key turning point in the conception of God from something static to something becoming. Something, you know, God is a verb is the name of a book, and it's become really quite common among liberal Jews and Christians to talk about God. It's like, for example, there's a biography of God, and how God evolves and grows up. And sometimes we talk about this, how God changes as we change. Sort of, some people even look at God in the early portions of Genesis as being an adolescent. He changes his mind, etc. The Christians began early in Christianity taught that God, there was a new God, an evolved God, a loving God that replaced this harsh and vengeful God. What struck me in reading this is that way lies dragons. I mean, that way lies heresy. What is to prevent somebody on acid or just good pot from deciding that God has evolved into somebody that only favors his personal family or cult, and makes it welded to this trajectory of this evolving God? There's, I guess I just think that not only do we need some nouns to corral this evolving, changing thing into something that is less likely to be dangerous to us, but that means to be moderately well defined. And I personally have spent my life as, you know, a snowflake liberal, deciding everybody's religion was their religion and it was fine, etc. Until one day I was in Yucatan looking at all the carved stone skulls on the walls and going to myself, I don't think I can be liberal about human sacrifice. After all, there's got to be some limit to my tolerance. I'm not asking anybody to answer this question, although I'd like it answered. No, maybe I wouldn't. In any event, it seems to me that we need to find some way of figuring out what our liberal fences are around a liberal, that's a very bad term, approach to apprehending, perceiving, understanding God.
So here's what you inspired me to think, David. So I appreciate it very much, which is another way of thinking about what is happening in Torah is, rather than thinking of God as an external, independent character, if you will, that we can hopefully know the way I know you, David, I know you, Susan, and you are these independent, distinct characters. That another way to think about it, rather than thinking that God is somehow evolving as a character through this story, is that what is happening is our experience of what we call God is evolving. And if what this is all about is really our evolution as human beings, our rising to higher levels of both ethical responsibility and spiritual development, then what's happening here is we are seeing a transfer of power in the Jewish Bible, from something that controls everything into to a transfer from that source into humankind. And that is, in a sense, what it means to grow up and to become a healthy human being, which is, instead of to see others, mother, father, others, as having the power over us, if that's the way we end up at the age of 60, we're in deep trouble. But if we evolve as human beings and begin to experience and assimilate into ourselves the power to be in charge of our lives, the power to make a difference in the world, then perhaps we're on a good path for some kind of evolution. So I think that's I think is what is happening. There's a transfer from the story of creation to ultimately the story of the Jewish people being empowered to make decisions and to create a world. So,
Thank you, my rabbi.
thank you. So let me call upon Catherine and then Richard and Robert. Catherine?
Okay, thank you, Rabbi. I had two thoughts as I read this parshat. First of all, there's something paradoxical in the fact that God will appear when the world becomes unrecognizable. I mean, Egypt is rendered unrecognizable through these plagues, and nothing appears as it should. And the second thought was a sort of modern thought, which was, how is it possible that Pharaoh insists on inflicting these plagues and the Egyptians themselves do not rise up against him? I kept waiting for the Egyptians to rise up. The Israelites, of course, are spared, so it's a different experience. But those were my two thoughts.
Yeah. So so it's interesting. We see in the story itself that at some point there are Egyptians evidently who say, we're turning our backs on this way of life. We're going with those folks out into the wilderness. But that's how imprinted and the Egyptians are, at least at this stage of the story, with accepting this level of control and even oppression. And so thank you for pointing that out. Let me call upon Richard, then Robert and Wendy.
Thank you, Rabbi. I'll try to be brief. Couple things. One is the term, they're lazy. And the first word that came to my mind is slipshod. Yeah, that's kind of like one of these paintings you just had out there. They're having some playful time. And another thing I noticed was that this business of being a verb, God is being a verb. E. Cummings has a piece called I-6 Non-Lectures, and he talks about man is a verb. And Allport's idea of becoming is that we're always becoming who we are. We don't have an identified until we go through a little slipshod period and playing with ourselves and playing with people. And lastly, I had this thought that God says to Moses, go and tell him to do this stuff, and I'm going to harden his heart so that I may show him where the power lies. So he's doing Pharaoh a favor. Get with it. You can't just try to make everything become your means to an end of the perfect world. That's not going to be a perfect world for you. You're going to learn something from this. You're going to get out of everybody's unconscious and become a human being. And isn't Egypt opening up a little passageway for stuff to come into Gaza now.
Thank you, Richard. And then we call upon Robert and Wendy. Thank you. Go ahead, Robert.
Thank you again for a lovely evening. You know, the more I study Torah, the more I see it with the eyes of symbolism.
Mm.
So, but that's how I view scripture. There's either a direct meaning or an indirect meaning. But the question is, what is the spiritual meaning? So I want to go back to a point you made. That is, I think, a terribly profound point, and that is, I am becoming versus I am. I am is very close to what the Muslims and the Baha'is have as he is. So this is my understanding. When God is being referred to and knowing as becoming versus I am, the only way we can know God is through his messengers. So who were the messengers before Moses? When I look at the dispensation and the teachings of Moses, it's like a turning point. There's a level of maturity and definition and completeness that I haven't seen before the dispensation of Moses. And so that's how I understand that becoming, that's what fruit does. And then when it is, it's at that point of fruition. So I view that comment in that context. Now, with regard to what was said earlier about what Christians believe, you know, I think it was 20 or it must have been 30 years ago, there had to be, I believe, 10,000 different denominations of Christianity. God only knows how many now, and I mean that literally. But Christ said, had you known Moses, you would have known me. My point is that oftentimes what happens in religion is that people hear, they don't study, they don't use their mind. You know, when we're together in the evening on Thursdays, you have provided a wonderful environment for open thinking. And so you hear all these different views that come from the heart, from reflection. There are people who go to church or wherever they go, but they never look at the scripture. They never humble themselves before their creator and say, what is it you are trying to teach me? What is it I am supposed to learn? So when anybody says something about Christianity or this or that, and of course I have more experience with Christianity and Baha'i, obviously, but I have often found it has nothing to do with their own individual learning. You know, it's something they hear and say, okay, yeah, that's good. But where's the passion? Religion is about passion. It's about either willing to live for it or die for it, or both. So thank you again. I know I always talk a little too much, but religion is such a gift that God has given us. And in Revelation, no matter what our faith, if we take the time to cultivate some understanding, and it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks, it's between us and our Creator. And what you said earlier is so true. How does it change our lives? How does it make Robert better? And God only knows I need a lot of better. He and I talk about that all the time, mainly from my side, not his. So anyhow, that's it. There's too much in all of these to dwell on.
Thank you, Robert. Here's one thing that you reminded me of in terms of you were contrasting those who just kind of who are presented with material and they don't really assimilate the material. They're able to replicate. They are able to repeat the material, but they haven't assimilated the material because they haven't made it part of themselves. So I want to go back to a painting that we had some time ago by Caravaggio, the Inn at Emmaus. And the way Caravaggio painted that, as a source of invitation into the moment that the painting was portraying, this moment of revelation. And so the way he was able to construct the painting itself, so that those who looked at it would not merely become kind of detached observers, but would be drawn into the moment and the experience of revelation itself. And I think that's what John Armstrong, in his piece that we quoted here on the study sheet, was also saying, is that it's one thing to look with some detachment at a work of art. It's another thing to have a relationship with the work of art. And in any good relationship, you're not merely taking as well defined and as a final source of information what you're being given, but it's being used as a stimulation for your own creativity and your own thinking. So I want to thank you for pointing out that difference. The way I understand religion, it's not meant to be a conveyance of information. It's supposed to be a seduction into a mystery. And it's that mystery that we find a source of real meaning, not within the definition of other information that we get. So I want to thank you for that. Let me call upon Wendy and Justin. So Wendy?
Yes, thank you. I see so much in the words themselves, evolution in itself being discussed. First, we have a rod, then we have an arm, then we have a hand, that they evolve. There's so much evolution in words in what we just read. First, God is saying, "Let my people go." Then it evolves to let my people go to worship me, to worship their God. That there's this constant evolution, and within that constant evolution, as I look at this painting, there's a lot of chaos. And in this, there's a lot of chaos in evolution. That this painting makes me feel like what we read today as I look at this painting.
Okay.
And a lot of discovery, a lot of unknown, a lot of and I contradict that with what I can't remember, I don't know her name, but the woman who spoke about Pharaoh and the people were quiet. The Pharaoh being stubborn, and he even says, "I will not let my people go," so that they maybe remain silent. They're not able to evolve. They're not able to have that voice. They're not able to have that creativity. I found that an interesting contradiction in this between the two as well. So it became more and more intriguing as we read more and more through this, because it kind of built upon itself. Each built upon itself to be one more step of an evolution to the end of this reading.
Oh, thank you, Wendy. And what you also got me to think about was, if you look at some of Willem de Kooning's earlier work, you'll see it's all quite thick and dense. And here he is at the end of his life, and this painting is very relaxed. And that notion, and there's some speculation, excuse me, that towards the end of his life, he was also experiencing some form of dementia. And so there is this, rather than this need to pile on and to cover every inch of canvas and to make it thick and to be in control of it. Here, everything has begun to loosen up. And so that to me is really just beautiful to think about. Let me call upon Justin, and then we'll begin to conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi, and everyone who has been commenting. Really appreciate hearing the conversation progress. And this is perhaps a favorite, really, theme of yours, Rabbi. To me, it seems of this. This is an observation, but of moving between maybe static statements, the sticks, and then the snakes, which are the deconstructive and the different ways in which the experience it's de-differentiated. It's removed or brought back into fluidity again, as in the de Kooning painting that you presented. And I just wondered, you know, I can see a lot of the emphasis again on the fluidization of the discourse, the moving into the snake, and maybe that's part of what that whole Moses and Paro story is like. Well, we can decide when it's going to be fluid and when it's going to be solid. But I just wonder if there's anything, you know, what pieces would you look at or want to be fluid and solid, and for us to take away in that way? What sticks as a shillelagh, or what moves with grace?
Nice. So thank you, Justin. And there's this lovely, I think, sub conversation that's going on that I think is really important. That one of the main aspects of Judaism is that it is not primarily about knowledge or about belief. It's less about knowing and more about asking. It's less about believing and more about acting. And in that sense, there has always been kind of discomfort within the Jewish tradition of things becoming too clarified and too defined. When they get that way, we try to disrupt it by finding some source of conflict, something to argue about, so that we can restore some life and some movement.
You could say discuss as well as argue.
Discuss, thank you, better than argue. So I go back to this, our theme here about the importance of experiencing the source of all life as being a verb, being something that is constantly in the process of becoming, rather than something that is firm and defined and clarified and static. And to be able to experience that requires some, if you will, letting go of on our own, which is what Pharaoh sees happening. He sees the people of Israel starting to relax, starting to let go. And when that happens, then he begins to lose control and power. And they begin to turn themselves into powerful beings, because they are now becoming engaged in a relaxed approach to life, if you will, that allows for reverie and play and ultimately leads to liberation. So it is a beautiful thing for me to be able to engage in that kind of playfulness, that sacred playfulness, with so many others who are also seeking to be sacredly playful. And those are the faces I'm looking at, and those who join us through other means online, who contribute their posts, who are engaged in this same path of sacred playfulness for the sake of our liberation and our sake of restoring some movement and life. But you want to say, go ahead.
I just want to say thank you to you all for providing a community for him to speak with and study with and learn with, because he's many wonderful things, but he doesn't hang out quite like this at home all the time. And I just love to hear what he's really thinking about. And without you, a big part of my life with my husband would be missing. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
God bless you all. And
God bless you
I
all.
look forward to our regathering. Okay. Be well, everyone. Look forward to our next.
Rabbi.
Thank you.
Okay.
And without Anna, we would be missing a bright light. She is so bright. Much love, friend. See you next week.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.